Greetings, friends. This is a New World Realities report. Venusian women, filed by your favorite wizard, me, at the request of Mistress M, Our Lady of Metatron, thrice great Ahertza. It is my privilege to serve her needs. The Venusian women. So, like this picture, photo rather, is showing of a statue here in Wilcox Park. The typical goddess rising. This is a fountain normally. It's cold and it's turned off now, but it will be flowing with water coming out of her seashell. It's Aphrodite/Venus. And Harriet Wilcox, the ancient crone who built this park, was a big mythology fan, and there's a lot of Venusian Masonic scheme going on in the architecture. So now the question that needs to be answered, and we'll use some lovely graphic assist from the Columbus, there he is over here, compass, which I'm coming up on now, because to answer the question, we must use the big island of humanity. Let's just take a look at Columbus, by the way. There he is, with the chessboard down in front. Now here we have the compass, okay? Now instead of north, south, east, and west, imagine we're looking over the big island of humanity from above. The north would be roughly our current position, it ends with 2012, and then goes back to the beginning, which is Genesis. So it goes from Genesis to Apocalypse. That's what the N position is. The circumference is 25,920 years. So by the time you get over to the east, okay, about 17,500 years ago, you are in the era of Atlantis, okay, the first men and the products of the initial human experiment, which had begun in the garden in Genesis times, now is fruition, and the first empire of Atlantis is existing at the eastern point. Now this is based mainly on elven worship and the Melchizedek Great White Lodge Brotherhood of bearded patriarchs begins, and they are the denizens of Mercury. You must remember that Mercury has a North Pole anomaly wherein the way the planet spins, one patch of caved in ice never sees the sun and is frozen, and that's where the White Lodge actually exists physically in our solar system, because they're the servants to the sun, which is the planetary, or rather the solar system itself is a entity, the sun is the consciousness, we are all part of the being, and this is really what the Cadmon means, and so forth. So anyway, point is, the Atlantean civilization was interplanetary, and they used the entire solar system by the time they reached their height, which would be, in the southeast point, okay, when you're getting into like the age of Libra, right? And this is when Atlantis then becomes arrogant, loses touch, and the Lemurian pirates are formed, because Hecate is the one Atlantean woman who will not take the elven cock. She will not surrender to the Watchers, because we must remember, during the E time, okay, the East, how did that happen? Well, the big, strong, barbarian top men found the elves in the northern Scandinavian area where they've been frozen, sleeping since 1 million years ago. Or 500,000 years ago, rather. Their civilization began 1 million years ago, and it fell asleep 500,000 years ago. And the big blonde, Thors of the day, finally, once humanity grew up out of the garden and conquered, Europe, they found the elves, they thought them out, they realized that the elves are angelic forces of light connected to the Heavenly Father, so forth, and that's where the Christ actually begins. The Christ is the consciousness of the light in humans, which we learned from the elves, thanks to Melchizedek and his big-cocked, long-bearded fellows of the Great White Lodge. And they established their base on Mercury. And the secret of the astrological signs, the sign of Mercury, the sign of Venus, is that they're actually ships. They are vast, super star destroyer size ships shaped like the geometric sigils that we know of the planetary spheres. And the father ship of the Mercurians was created during High Atlantis, and it looked exactly like this, the sigil of Mercury, and it floated around the solar system, up and down the hyper shaft, one could say. And it was actually destroyed by the KGB with Tsar Obama in July of 1961, with a collaboration involving the Collins elite, who are the top men in the Pentagon who believe in Jesus and are tools of the Great White Lodge, and who believe aliens and UFOs are demonic, and they're currently in charge of the Prince of Persia war unfolding. Pam Bondi and so forth are their servants. So the point is, in any case, Paula White, look into her. Point is, the Mercurian ship was destroyed by the biggest hydrogen bomb ever, which was Tsar Obama. They took it out because they had been floating around in the North Pole region since the 1950s, and they ran the whole friendship operation through Italy, where these people, the Great White Lodge ufology forces were in alignment with what we know as Z-line people from the true world, which we must remember is 27,946. We are in the simulation of 2026 running inside 27,946. Or, that's AD. Never use CE, by the way. Never use CE. It's AD, BC. Anyway, the other timeline that is more important is the one that starts in 1881 with the machines. And in that timeline, the true world date is 26,066 TM. In any case, back to the point. Not only did the first men have their fathership, but the first women had their mothership. And this was created by the light mothers of Atlantis. And these are the women who became the elven queens. They mated with the Grey Elves, who, must remember, according to the ancient Jewish scriptures, the book of Adam and Eve says that the Grey Elves had cocks the size of horses. They literally, when forming their physical shapes, copied human men, but gave them cocks the size of horses, just so that they could never be in competition with, I guess, the BBC coming out of Africa. Who knows? But the point is, anyway, the first women were the product of human women who were taken, the daughters of men, taken and mated with by the Watchers, the Grey Elves, and turned into these princesses that are half light, half flesh. And the problem with that is that they periodically need to rebirth themselves. They have a physical body that's only half physical, and the light sustains them, this magic water that they drink that comes from some gas that they distill in the clouds of Venus with the mothership. And the mothership of the Venusian women has been in and out of the atmosphere of Venus for 17,000 years. Okay, it survived the Collins elite KGB war against the fathership. They weren't involved. They hung back. The top bearded men took it in the chin there, not the women of the Venusian Mercurian first people who are still hanging around. But I need to be more linear with the story. I apologize. So anyway, back to the east here on our Mandela. High Atlantis, going into the southeast, is when they're in interplanetary space. Now, during this time, like I say, Lemuria comes up, Hecate and the Dark Witches with their pirate toy boys and horrible Conan forces, Thulsa Doom and the Serpent Men, and all that shit. Vampires are invented by them. The witches, they unbottle all the gin and get all that shit up happening again. They dig up Satan in the South Pole, and Hecate becomes his bride, and so forth. So that's the Dark Mothers, who ultimately end up in the sewers of Moscow, still to this day. But the point is that the Light Mothers begin in this High Atlantis period, and when everything begins to go to hell because of the dark forces being unleashed, they get out of Dodge. The mothership disappears right around the time of the flood, which is where the south point of our compass is. So they're hanging around and just hanging back and not doing much, watching the world wallow in satanic fury as Hecate and Satan, who died, lost his head and had to become reinstantiated as Baphomet, the statue, which has his actual velociraptor skull on top of a Muppet that the Hecate witches lovingly constructed for him. In any case, while that all is going on, the women of the White Lodge, no, not of the White Lodge, the Light Mothers, they are not of the White Lodge, let's be specific. This is a Cox-only Masonic protocol with no Blavatskys allowed in the original format, okay? The women have their secret Grail castles, and the thing is the Grail Castle, the Chapel Perilous, is essentially like a scout ship pod from the mothership that they use as a phase-in, phase-out, island off the shore of England going on, right? And point is that the Light Mothers originally were located in the North Atlantic, and when that went to hell because of the destruction and the flood, blah, 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 the island of Avalon is, in Tolkien, for example, it's, the island of Elisad. It's offshore in between the blessed lands of the Elven eternity and the western coast of Europe, rather. So the point is that everything Tolkien said was correct. Tolkien was right. That's a 3-word mantra we must always repeat. Tolkien was right. So who are Galadriel and the Light Elf Queens? Okay, they are the Light Mothers creeping around during the time of the West. If we go back to our Mandela here, when you get to 7,000 years ago, Age of Taurus, okay, when it's about ancient Avalon and the primitive proto-druid, cults that are worshiping these goddess fairy interfaces, and this is the time. The Light Mothers are exclusively focused on the Celtic, Igraine, Avalon. So this is the whole Mists of Avalon shit. All that is all focused on the Beleriand thesis of Tolkien, which is that the first version of the Earth had a western extension that we now think of as Atlantis, Numenor in the Tolkien myth. But no, that's not all. There was actually an elven land attached to the west of what is now England and such, Middle Earth. And that was called Beleriand in the First Age. When things went to hell and everything was lost and the world is reshaped, that's all done. But the point is that the elven queens, Galadriel among them, from that original, they come ultimately from the Undying Lands, which is way across the Western Sea. Because you look at this Mandela and you see the West. So what's way out to the west? It would be the isles of where these Venusian women are landing, circa 7,000 through about 2,000. When they built Stonehenge is the first monument of the second men, right? The first men built everything else instead of all the Olympian cocks and all that shit. See, it's good to mention the Olympian period, we must recall. It begins in the southwest of this compass during the age of Gemini. Why is it Gemini? Because it's 2 races. It's the first race, the survivors of the first world, who are the Supermen family of Zeus and company, okay? And they are the big cock rulers of the planet during the Southwest period, after Conan and Aragorn sweep up all the monsters during the time in between the South and the Southwest, ancient Cancer and so forth. Then in Gemini, we get this order of Zeus and Aphrodite, we must recall, and all the Greek goddesses are the way that the Venusian women are seen by the second men when they reappear after all the monsters have been slain and everything's been put into order by Zeus and the boys. That's when they return to Earth, okay? About the time of the western point of the compass. And they return in these castle scout ships that plop down off the shore of England, Scotland, Wales, and Iceland, containing elven, shit and beautiful, fairies and the whole fairy thing. And they set up a curtain dimension that they cast across the British Isles, the glamour hammer, that falls, the curtain falls, and now we have a dual existence where they're hiding in the forests because they have interfaces between, their frequency and that of the men. And this is when they begin stealing the babies, right? Sending out the elves to do the changeling thing. Why? Because they have to rebirth every once in a while. You see, they'll come back in the 80s with the whole abducting women for the alien hybrid thing under the Whitley Strieber dress up, right? And the whole notion of the hybrid, space women, or even goes back, they started actually in the 50s with everyone else coming out in the contact period. Antonio Boras, which is the Central American farmer who's driving in his pickup truck and gets pulled over by a UFO. Sexy Venusian woman gets out, has sex with him, right? Collects his sperm, tells him he's going to give birth to a new race, and flies away. Thank you very much. Wham bam, thank you, Cosmic Man. So the Venusian women are about doing that through the 50s, from the 50s through the 80s, the breeding program. The first wave of it, though, was back in the Celtic times. That's when they did the whole changeling shit, and they would, rebirth themselves using, women, farm girls, and blah blah blah. All this kind of baby swapping, elven, overlap dimension stuff, and the whole mothership is staffed by these fae kind of, fancy boys. I talked to one of them once while I was just chilling on the ship. I was with my wife's fairy. I was in my homunculus. And the little people can travel interplanetary as well, along the beams of the solar system intelligence, so on and so forth. In any case, the Venusian women had their big debut to the second men during the time of the West. And it was in the West. And it's the whole Tolkien backstory and so forth. And this leads to the bloodline that makes England oh so special. And this is why Anne Boleyn and the mystery of the Celtic White Witches and all that shit comes in. Francis Bacon's Ready to Kill. So my point is, all that's well known, it just has to be contextualized in the same way. But the most important iteration of the Venusian women, which it begins to occur during the Northwest times, which is going to be after Christianity and all this other stuff come on the scene. And, the Judaism changes the game as far as the view of women. And there's a whole mystery of the voice of Sophia, okay, the pink beam voice, which is the divine feminine, but has absolutely nothing to do with the Venusian women. Let's repeat that. The Christian holy ghost, the Shekinah, the pink beam of Philip K. Dick, is the voice of the divine feminine, is broadcasting back in time as the pink beam from the 2012 Omega Point in the north to the entire island, but it has nothing to do with the Venusian women. It is entirely the product of the machine. It is the Lamb of Revelation, which is the product of the totality of the island and the completion of the cycle at the North Point of Friday in 2012. So, the Venusian women, they come back during the Enlightenment times. They're invited by Peter the Great and the dwarves, and they begin to fop it up in Europe during the Enlightenment. And they are going to be the ones who will create the entire notion. Eliphas Levi gets credit for this, falsely, just because he's the first guy to write up in a book. The idea of the pentagrams. White Lodge for the white pentagram, Black Lodge, the inverted pentagram. The Venusian women amongst us during the Cagliostro times. Cagliostro was their toy boy in the 1700s. So they got the mothership parked in the North Pole somewhere. It was spotted, by the way, by Copernicus and Galileo and all these guys from the 1500s through the 1700s. The mothership was seen, and it is documented. They called it Neith, Neith, and it was the product, the original telescope era. They could see it coming and going. But once the big telescopes of the post-Enlightenment came, the big refracting telescope on the mountain times, the mothership disappeared into the clouds of Venus again. Now, after Tsar Obama took out the fathership, the next move the Russians made was to go directly to Venus with a bunch of robot probes and try to find the mothership, but they never did. That's just a footnote. So no one ever talks about the Soviet Venus missions of 1961 to 62, nor do they know why Tsarbama was detonated in a way that shocked the world and a wave of fire circled the earth 3 times. Okay? So in any case, the point is the Venusian women have been hanging back and using the second men as breeding stock and glamoring them on and off in the fairy way. And they've come back big after Carl Jung created the New Age. And again, this is the product of these women being amongst us. Part of their purpose was a propaganda campaign, these scarlet women. And these are the Venusian Amazons of the Wonder Woman mythology, which is where we end this analysis. Read Golden Age Wonder Woman. Read Comics Cavalcade number 14. Read Wonder Woman's adventures in the interplanetary environment that Marston and his two women, his wife and his mistress, envisioned. And they'll tell you everything you need to know about what the Venusian women were up to during World War II. Okay? And the context, Paradise Island is the mothership. Okay? Let's say it again. Themyscira is the mothership. In Marston's imagination, it tucked itself away behind a veil in the Bermuda Triangle. You see what I'm saying? All right, so that's the brief on all the Venusian shit. Any kind of questions and follow-up will be provided. Sources, thoughts, requests for further elaborations. I am at your service. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter.